You're live.
We are live, and there is at least a quorum here. And I've got one more waiting to come in. So we're going to start today with our committee discussion on broadband. And Maria is here. I'm looking for my stuff, my agenda, but today's agenda is really simple. Because Maria, you had work, the 360, or you wanted to go through the decision points? We ran out of time.
Sure, we can do that. That document is just very high level decision points to maybe guide your discussion. It might be most helpful for, possibly eliminating things that you don't want to include or reaffirming what you do want to include. So if you want to go through that to start, I will.
I think that would be a good start, unless you think it would be better to go through the side by side.
No, I think it's maybe a good start. And I know because there's been a lot of discussion and I'm not sure, where the committee's going, and you may have already decided or have greater clarity. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'll pull it up now, and I believe Faith has posted this as well under my name. So This is actually slightly updated from what you had seen and what was posted previously, very slightly updated. But I just wanted to clarify. So I've gone through and I've kind of asked some high level questions, and what's included beneath the questions are options for your consideration, right? So for example, in looking at the goals of legislation this year, H360 deals with fixed broadband access. S118, as proposed by Senator Brock, also includes expansion of cellular coverage. So, I just wanted to put kind of the big options that are out there for you to think about as you go through. And I also followed your lead, Chair Cummings, in terms of kind of going through what the goals are for this year and legislation, what programs you think are needed. And then once you've made those decisions, then talking about who implements and administers these programs, whether it's an existing agency or a new entity. So that's the general construct. Okay, does that make sense? So I've already kind of addressed what I see as one of the big issues with respect to your goals. If you're looking at just fixed broadband, or are you also going to look at mobile coverage and expanding cellular coverage in the state? There's a timing element with respect to your 2021 legislation in terms of what your goals might be. Short-term goals, what you would like to see implemented immediately within the next 6 months or within the calendar year, and then how much money you anticipate appropriating in fiscal year 2021, 2022. So those are some general concepts to think about in terms of goals of the bill that you ultimately pass. And then programs that have been proposed or discussed, everything from pre-construction programs, usually that's been discussed in terms of a grant program, and this would be for the engineering, design, business planning, make-ready work. Obviously, construction programs, and that's the actual building of the networks, whether it's, I'll talk later on about, how things are financed, but in terms of programs. So you have those two types of programs. You've also heard proposals about digital inclusion. That gets to affordability, adoption, digital literacy training, and so forth. And then workforce development. There were a few proposals in H360 concerning building and identifying the needs in the communications workforce. Funding
Maria,
sources, yes.
just going back to programs needed to accomplish the goal, it seems to me that there's one more program, and that is strategy and planning. Because that to me is actually a program, because unless you do that, to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it on an ongoing basis and how it's going to be coordinated, all the rest of these things are not going to happen, are not going to happen well. And I think it's worth designating as a separate area of something that has to be accomplished in order to accomplish any of our goals.
Thank you. That's a great point. And I should also say, I hesitated to even do a document like this because I was certain I was going to miss something like that. And I didn't want to, inadvertently not cover something that you obviously want to. So thank you for mentioning that. I'm sure there'll be other spots here.
And we do have the group that is working on the plan coming in to give us kind of a early discussion. Next Friday was the first time they had any free time. So they will be coming in to talk to us. So we have some idea as to what they're thinking.
And Madam Chair, and perhaps it isn't too premature to mention, we're always under this pressure of time in terms of getting this and other things out. And I know that there are discussions underway right now between the pro tem and the speaker about the possibility of adding another week to the legislative session, recognizing in particular that committees like Appropriations and Finance may need more time to do what they need to do.
And I got an email this morning saying that we had an extra week. But I wasn't clear if that meant they would just move, they were readjusting the schedule or if we were moving back adjournment. So that's good to know.
Well, the proposal, as I understand it, and again, I don't know if it's necessarily finalized yet, but it's certainly under discussion.
Yeah, that's my question, Madam Chair. Did you get an email that said it's happening or that we're contemplating getting that?
No, I got an email saying she'd spoken to the House. I got to get out of here and get into my emails, but
I received the same email and I think it was still under discussion with the House.
What?
so we are gonna have enough to do. We're gonna just keep moving quickly. I'm gonna come back on here and avoid lunch. We're going to have enough to do. What the House needs from us, the Appropriations, is a number. They don't need the bill. They just need a number. And what I have left it with is, at this point, we're looking at the $150 million that the House put in. And, if we don't use all of that, we will find a place to park it for next year. Because
Now,
one
is
of
that
the
number, though, that they're looking for, the number that we're going to spend in the next year, or the total of the ARA funds that we plan to devote to broadband?
I think it's the total of this round of funding. There's still some out there, but as Jane said, we met this week in joint fiscal and reappropriated money that we appropriated a year ago. That money has been sent out and then either does or does not get used and gets reappropriated. And I think we're waiting. I believe I read the president said broadband was infrastructure. There's an infrastructure bill coming.
Yep.
And we may find that some of this money will get reappropriated and, we'll use infrastructure money.
Well, one of the things, though, just to bear in mind about numbers we put out is to understand for what period we're doing it. I think it was FX Flynn that raised in his testimony the importance of knowing that there's money for the whole project, because that's
Yes.
going to highly, their future
And-
funding, other sources are going to be dependent upon knowing that they're able to finish the project.
And I got an email about the same time explaining that, and that makes total sense. And we may disperse it, in phases. But yes, I think right now, we've got the Washington Electric Co-op CV fiber. For the whole Washington Electric Co-op money. And yeah, they're gonna go out and invest money in string poles. They know that. I'm not sure what Northeast Fiber has. Those EC, Northeast, and CV are Northeast, seem to be the places that are ready to go.
It's just that so long as we put in some sort of guardrail to know that we haven't allocated in effect this unlimited amount of funds for X number of years without any checkpoints or controls.
No, and actually, I think the department did a decent job of that last time. They didn't disperse any money. Actually, we told them not to. And they did speed checks, especially for the wireless setups, to make sure they delivered before they got paid. And I would assume we're going to continue with that, those guardrails. So I wanted to go back to goals, because we had that discussion last week, and I've got, our goal is universal connectivity. We took a vote, and it was broadband only, 100, 100 to unserved and underserved. That's what I had as a goal. The telecom plan, get that out, was a goal. And then,
Madam Chair, that goal is to task someone with getting such a plan out. Is it not correct?
yes, we are not going to write the plan.
Okay.
All right. And then I have something on.
Have one
workforce.
dissenting vote on that, by the way.
Yes, there was. I have five votes. Somebody must have been absent.
Yeah.
And then, we got notice about make ready and pole harvesting. All right. I think we solved yesterday that there aren't make ready problems that we're going to have to deal with. That it sounds like things are definitely better than they were 3 years ago. But that's what I have as a goal.
Yeah. Now, I don't know, at the time we talked about this, was there mention made of the fact that I don't remember the number in the governor's plan that was put out, and may have put out after that discussion for cellular. There's a chunk of millions of dollars in there for that.
Okay, in the governor's proposed
Yes.
budget, yeah, he came out with a separate budget
Was under the whole
Or-
connectivity.
for the whole
Block.
ARPA grants,
But some of it was broadband and some of it was cellular.
cellular. I don't know about cellular. I know there was 80 and 80 in for broadband.
Don't look at
We're just 10 million apart, but decimal dust these days.
I
Could have gotten
love-
10 million a few, 2 years ago. We would have thought we were in heaven. So we're going to focus on broadband, and we're working on universal connectivity. Our goal is 100. And
Madam Chair.
so, Maria, have we been through the first slide? Here it comes.
Almost. This is actually a pretty short document, and I think I'm going to just run through this and then close it, really, because I think you're
Okay.
pretty much having this discussion, and yeah, so I think that we probably don't need to spend a lot of time here. And so obviously funding sources, you've already talked about the big one, ARPA, and as well as potential funding sources through an infrastructure plan. But then also, I just wanted to remind you that in the House proposal, they also talk about the 0.4% from the universal service charge that they use for the operations of a new entity, and then any remaining amount going to the programs that they established. So just broadly speaking, the types of financing and support you've considered in your various proposals: grants, loans, administrative technical support, property tax exemption, and the establishment of some kind of a broadband core. I'm not sure that you,
I would
yes?
do that. One other piece that we talked about, we haven't spent a lot of time on it, and that's equity.
Yes, so
Yeah.
subsidies potentially, or any
it's-
kind of
it's actually
financial
equity
assistance. Yeah,
Position in effect, a CUD or a CUD subsidiary, and taking an equity position and then being repaid for a revolving fund through profits that are generated by that, which avoids the restrictions regarding loans that are likely to be in the federal funds. And it's a way to potentially provide some revolving capital.
yeah.
But isn't that just a grant though? I mean, I'm very interested in this question, but I've become convinced that it is baked into our grant premise.
Well, the grant is something you can never get back.
Oh, so we would the state would have an equity position. All
I mean,
right,
that's the theory behind it. And yes, the state would have an equity position in the capital stock of whatever the entity is. The entity may be a subsidiary of the CUD, it may be a partnership, it may be, who knows what it may be. But it's just keeping the flexibility of saying that there are other ways of looking at it rather than just giving money.
okay. That might help answer the question: is what happens if the CUD goes out of business or decides to sell to a national for-profit? Because there's I don't think we want to get stuck with another warehouse full of small cells, but I don't think we want to end up having somebody sell out to a for-profit.
But the
know.
CUDs are, they're the municipalities.
But
So they can't just sell out to a for-profit. They're a public entity.
They could
And-
sell all their assets, though, couldn't they?
yeah,
I'm talking to you through a formerly public
Yeah.
telecom. I mean,
Yeah.
it happens.
Oh,
yeah.
There are dissolution provisions.
And I've asked the treasurer's office to come in and just talk to us a little bit about bonding, and the kind of safeguards that are there to make sure they don't get too much in debt. Hopefully they're there, or we should know they aren't. And also what happens if they fail? And there's a $50 million bond out there. I don't, I don't know. But I think we should know that going in. Okay. So Maria, we're back. So on this
So
one,
in terms of the entity,
yeah. Who's eligible for
entities.
support?
Right. Right. So obviously in the House proposal, it's the CUDs alone, jointly, or with a partner. It could be a private ISP or a distribution utility. So you've heard various proposals here, including the independent telephone companies. These are the rural local exchange carriers. You heard a proposal about just having the smaller internet service providers in the state, although that's not defined. So that could include not only the rural local exchange carriers, but small cable companies or fixed wireless internet service providers. You've also heard, opening the door to any internet service provider, public, for-profit, and then electric companies. Obviously, so we've got a full range of
Well, one of the,
potential.
We're gonna have
Phase it.
more.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Senator Brock.
I mean, it raises a number of questions that we should talk about and consider. Do we, for example, continue some form of a line extension program? We recognize this bill is so focused on CUDs, but CUDs represent, if you take a look at the total locations that there are around Vermont, the CUDs, if they fully connect all of the underserved or unserved locations, that's only 19% by my math, of the total internet locations in Vermont. And we have internet locations that are served in Vermont by all of these other entities that are outside of the scope if we do solely a CUD bill. At some point, presumably the CUDs will go down the road to get to their end of last mile locations and pass through some of the territory, but it's very unclear that are held by these other folks that are providing lower speeds. If our overall goal is statewide to get to 100, if we solely focus on the CUDs, I think we're missing the boat. But there's also the contrary thought process that we need to, if we give public money, we got to get something back. And it's that's what we haven't been doing, is getting something back.
Right.
That something
Well-
back may be neutral access to the new wire. We know that ultimately, if a CUD to get to the last mile has to go through the territory of a legacy provider with their fiber, there are going to be some percentage of folks who are going to attach to that fiber and get away from the legacy providers. That's possible, assuming there's no partnership arrangement. But it seems to me we have to think broadly about all of these possibilities, because the real impact, if we're only dealing with 19%, presumably a larger amount if people ultimately connect and replace legacy providers, but we're dealing with a small subset of the problem.
What's the problem?
Did the
What's the
House
problem?
bill-
It's a small subset.
Senator McDonald, just let me check. Did the House bill have a line extension program in it? No.
no.
Okay, because that was one that was oversubscribed last year. And might be one, because I'm thinking of the person up North Street that's the lobbyist that's working on 151 or 41 with a couple of kids trying to, do their homework, and she's trying to be in a meeting. And the chance that you're going to get a CUD line you know, through downtown Montpelier and up there anytime soon. But these were grants to people, not to for-profit, Senator. These were grants to help people pay for the line extension. And we did that. I think we did the entire Bear Swamp Circle.
What's
Some
the
of you have
problem
not
we're
had
trying
the
to solve,
pleasure of
Madam
being
Chair?
lost in Bear Swamp, but I have.
But
So that's one program we may want to consider.
And can I
Se-
just,
Senator
go ahead.
Brock has said that we described the problem of going to a place that's 18% of the 19% of the areas is where we're going. Those are the unserved areas. And either we're going to go there or not. What is the problem with letting the CUDs, the for-profits doing what they're going to do and concentrating on the stuff that they're not going to do?
I don't think he said there was a problem. I think we've got, right now,
I'm sorry.
I'm running on 25-3, which you've defined as underserved.
No, Madam Chair, you and the people in Montpelier and me, who's right now operating on this, are being served by 25-3.
Right.
Okay. Fairpoint or Consolidated is replacing this right now today out on the
Yes.
roads with fiber. We have said we wish to go where people are not served or underserved.
Right.
Which is, Senator Brock, I believe accurately has said that represents 19% of the area.
Right.
Okay, or numbers. So are we going to go there?
That's not the problem.
What is the problem?
Okay, I think the question is, there's Montpelier, all right? 3 miles or a mile up the road, there's a house that isn't served. If we do the line extension program, we were giving that 1 or 2 houses a grant, the individuals, to help them pay for extending probably the Comcast or Consolidated line that's nearest to their home.
Yep.
All right, which will get them broadband arguably a lot faster than waiting for CV fiber to string all the way through Montpelier and out. With CV fiber's got all of Roxbury and all of Calais to cover.
Madam Chair, you have to go back and ask the engineers. We're not talking about sending fiber through Montpelier, one side and out the other side. We're
But
talking
if you
about
want to
going,
get to that house, you will have to.
Madam Chair,
Madam Chair, the vast, biggest areas of unserved need a highway to get to them, to serve them. And that's our first task, rather than building a paved
Yes.
road in Montpelier. Yeah.
No, that's right. Nobody's arguing that.
Okay,
What we're saying is, are we completely leaving out for-profit carriers?
no, we're
Or
not.
are we going to consider?
We're
Are we
not leaving
going
them
to
out.
consider,
We
you
have
can,
said-
let me finish. Are we going to leave them out, or are we going to consider that we might continue the line extension program, which would allow, and if they put fiber in Montpelier, then they'll be extending fiber up North Street or out Gould Hill Road. That's the only question.
No, Madam Chair, there were 3 things that we were talking about doing. One was building fiber out into areas that didn't happen. The
Yes,
second thing we were thinking about was, how do we have a plan to hook people up to that for the ends of those areas?
Right.
And third thing we were going to think about was, do we subsidize for the first several months of operation people who hooked up and find that whatever they have is expensive and they're not inclined to hook up? I don't think it helps us to start out with that, the back end of that. We're agreement to go to where the most people are unserved and then apply the second and the third priorities to those new areas and the areas that you've just mentioned. So, and we're not ruling out for profits.
Okay, that's all I want. That's all. We're in the basic setting here. The question is, who is it possible to have money go to? Any form, any kind.
Well, one of
That's
the
all.
questions, good question.
And we
because
can
one of the
narrow it
questions
down.
we asked early on was, and I think it was to your concern, which was how much money would the investor-owned utilities need for us to pay them to go to the places we'd like them to go? And
was your
I think
question.
we agreed that didn't matter. They weren't interested in going there. They were going to upgrade the places that they've already worked in. But
Actually, Senator, what the gentleman from Consolidated told you was that if you gave him $80 million, he would do it.
well, then put someone to sit down with them and write a contract. They've told us
I
they
don't
do
think
it
they've
the
ever
last
said,
three
they have
times.
said
Okay.
they won't go there on their own dime because
I
they
did-
are for profit.
Madam
But
Chair, I
they would go
apologize.
there on our dime.
I apologize. I was trying to help make the questions we were dealing with clear rather than trying to answer them. So I
Okay.
stopped at that point.
Senator Pearson,
I think they're very separate questions of, do we do some line extension versus, who are we really targeting? I'd be open to a small amount of money to continue the line extension, but I would want to hear from the CUDs who were considering investing significantly in that it won't undermine their project. There is some of that potential, but for Senator McDonald's benefit, I would say the problem we're trying to solve most broadly is connecting as many Vermonters as quick as possible. And so maybe line extension is part of that strategy. It's not about the totally unserved. It's not about the underserved. It's sort of the people that are right next. And there's some in Chittenden County. I mean, don't think we've all got the sweet deal. I have the sweet deal in Burlington, but around the county, there are plenty of people that are half a mile from being connected. I do want to just be clear. I don't think I've never heard anyone agree that 25-3 is underserved. I think we have, to my mind, it's not ideal. It's not meeting state goals, but it's not what we're trying to deal with. Those people
that's
are
in the House bill.
I don't think so.
Less than 25.3 is
Less than
under,
25.3.
right. So unserved is less than 4.1. Underserved is anything between 4.1 and less than 25.3.
Okay.
And for your line extensions program, LECAP, you allowed consumers to access those funds if they did not have at least 25.3. And there's only one other thing I wanted to say. The House bill does not have a line extension programs. They were looking more kind of universal community coverage. But I just wanted to remind you that in H315, you did reallocate some unobligated Sierra funds, $1.6 million for the line extension program.
Yep, that was mouse meat from a couple of
That was
bills.
from
That's
the
from-
ARA funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sierra
And
funds,
I
yep.
thought that was for the extensions they hadn't been able to fulfill because of the timing on the ARA. But
Thank you, Maria. I was waiting to say that, so thank you.
Okay, great.
And do we think that gets us through this year? Like, is that the thinking? It's basically.
well, we'll have to ask the department.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how many. I just don't
That'd be
recall.
great, because it's hard to argue that we shouldn't do that. and I do worry that it's a distraction from the big goal here is, in my mind, is more of a system as opposed to treating the symptom. It's like, what are we going to do for the counties that are totally underserved? And that's where the focus, I think, we need to stay focused.
Maybe it would help if we
Same
start
time, though,
working.
from a strategic standpoint, we need to focus on the overall goal. We need to crank up to the top level goal and look down to the top level goal is ubiquitous 100/100 service to every location within Vermont. Now, we can prioritize under that. And we know that these locations that have no service, that are being served by the CUD, may well be at the top of that list. But we can't, in my opinion, ignore everything else, including those places that are served by Comcast and Verizon and whoever else. We've got to look at this as a whole picture so that whoever is, quote, in charge, unquote, is not doing disparate things that don't serve this common purpose. And to me, we got to think through it at the top level. We have this tendency to get down in the weeds about what kind of wire we're going to put up and so on and so forth without having the strategy of what we're doing and why we're doing it thought out in the first place. We don't do that, this is going to be a mess.
Madam Chair, Senator Brock is correct. And where we have 25-3, and without calling it, underserved or underserved, it's 25-3. And it got there because investor-owned utilities, for the most part, put it there. And they put it there because it's in their business interests. And it's in their business interests today with their own money to upgrade those 25-3 areas to broadband. And if we need line extensions, we have a bunch of money right now that we have available to allot, and we believe we may or may not have an even greater amount of money with the infrastructure bill should it pass. I believe that in what Senator Brock is suggesting, the answer to what he is suggesting is to say it's in the best interest to build out fiber into the areas that does not have interstate highways and have that ready and know it's going to be there when an infrastructure building comes along. And we will then concentrate on building out from those areas, perhaps at the same time as the Comcast of the world are building out in the areas from 25-3 to go to fiber, and CUDs and ourselves can tinker with that to make that second stage work, knowing that we have an interstate system that goes out to everybody. And then we can further tinker to augment people to hook up once they're hooked up to get some subsidy. So I think that is what Senator Brock says about a comprehensive plan to deal with all of that. That's my suggestion for an answer. And if someone thinks it's a wrong answer, then I'm all ears.
Okay. Our overall goal is to get 100 to every home in Vermont. It is then to be able for every person that wants to hook up to it. But in order to get there, we have to have strategies or plans. The first thing, it sounds like the House has seen the development of local CUDs as our strategy or plan. I think it's
Tactic, yep.
to get that out there, okay? And they have focused exclusively pretty much on CUDs, right?
As the instrument to get it out there.
Yes, okay. We have talked about some of our local independent telecoms as a way of getting it out. Waitsfield Telecom has personnel, they have access to cable, They have customers. They are the phone provider. Franklin has the owners, it sounds like personally have strung wire to everyone's house. You know, Champlain Cable, Waitsfield Champlain Cable are definitely bigger entities. They're family owned, but I doubt that they're not for profit. But they're boots on the ground. Do we want to use them to get, and their expertise to get fiber out to those areas? Or do we want to wait until
Absolutely.
a CU? Okay,
Absolutely. And what's been offered as the way to do that is to have the CUDs work with them when the Franklin Phone Company would be better suited to get it out, and that they get the help to do that. Other places, the for-profits would be better suited and will probably do it. And what you have set, the course you've set us on, Madam Chair, is to go to the places that need the fiber interstate highways, and then make attachments to them, and then hook people up. And we have to coordinate that so that it progresses in all places.
okay. 360 says that a local telecom has to be connected with, they have to work with and through a CUD.
What would we say? What should we
Well,
say?
that's what I'm saying. Are we going to put that restriction on if,
Well, let's ask the question.
Yeah,
What should we-
okay, I've got Senator Pearson and then Senator Hardy.
Please go to Senator Hardy because she's less assertive.
Okay,
over here.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you,
She's
patient
this
Senator
way
Hart.
on my screen.
Senator McDonald, I just ask that you allow other people to participate in this conversation, because it's really hard to get a word in edgewise when you're dominating. So I just am asking you to try to tone it down. But
Thank you
thank
for
you.
sharing that with me. I appreciate it. Go ahead.
thank
Tell
you.
us how would it answer the question that we have before us.
I think I've suggested this before, which is I think it's really would be helpful to go to the bill and look at the bill that was sent to us. It may not be everything we want, but it's a really, really solid, good bill. And I think it might help us frame how we're thinking about these questions and the answers that we need to the questions we need to answer. In terms of I think the framework that they've put out, that most everything goes through the CUDs, makes a lot of sense. We have been burned over and over and over again by giving public money to private entities and hoping they're going to do the right thing. And we can't keep doing that. And so the best way to prevent that is to set up a public framework and public oversight of the funds. And if private companies want to work with those public entities and do so based on public, transparency and rules for how they can spend the money, then that's okay. But just doling out money to more private companies is not going to get us universal broadband coverage.
So the question was, how do we do what you just said you think we ought to do? So what's the answer?
We're going to go through the bill, okay? We're going to get the side by side up and then we're going to walk. Senator Pearson.
I think I'm fine for the general concept to be through the CUDs as the House has proposed, but they acknowledged that this was one of the areas that they sort of didn't get to. I hope that's Maria coming back. And I can't remember who proposed it, but I don't think we need to insist that all the money go through a CUD, and that a private operator could be grant eligible if they're under contract to serve every location. I don't know what the legal term is, but that's a real distinction. I mean, it frankly wouldn't bother me if Consolidated decided that they were going to hook up every home in Enosburg Falls. I mean, if they're I'm sort of agnostic about who does it, but they have to go for universal. And if they, and I think the big ones won't. So I think it's an elegant solution, and it will help the Franklin Telecoms. It will help the Mount Mansfield, which is the Nulties, not through a CUD, but as long as they're pledging to that, why would we care? I think to me, that's the answer. Is generally we're going through the CUD, but in the narrow case where Waitsfield Telecom or somebody else is under contract to serve every address with a meaningful contract, then I think they should be open to that. We should be open to funding them.
Okay.
So how do we craft the language?
All right, are we agreed that the primary focus is going to be on CUDs because they are working primarily in unserved areas, but that we would allow grants that met certain criteria, and I believe the House bill does this, to go to other entities? Does that work?
With the strings on it that we've
With
that we haven't
criteria?
yet decided.
Yes.
Yeah.
Senator Bray.
So, I think Senator Pearson's serving every address is an elegant, that's what we want. We don't want the cherry picking and stranding of customers out there. We also talked another way to get at it without picking favorites or something is to build in these performance criteria. So yesterday we talked about, for instance, to be direct about it, that it's a fiber-based solution because we want to be building a durable utility for the long haul. We talked about adherence to a certain set of standards so that we knew that there would be interoperability. We weren't going to go out and build 12 different systems that can't really work well together over time. And I'll quit there, but there was, standards plus a commitment to every address, I think goes a long way to picking the partners, to letting the partners pick themselves who are going to join the program.
How do we write the standards?
There are standards in the House bill. Okay, so we're going to
Does
start
not
looking.
allow anybody else other than CUDs to receive money, if I'm not correct.
We're going to walk through and we'll take a look at their standards and then we'll see if we wish to adjust them. Maria, that is Maria.
Yes.
Can you say, you're on the phone, right? So you can't screen share. Can Faith screen share the side-by-side?
Sure. Let me find it.
Can I ask a quick question before we go to the side-by-side? Did we finish with all the decision points?
I think we're going to.
Not quite. But
Maria, are you there?
That wasn't supposed to be a joke, but apparently today it is.
This is sausage making at its finest.
Okay. Well,
But
I've always
believe
liked
me,
fine
we come out
sausage.
with good stuff. I've only had one bill sent back to committee in 20 years. And that was a favor to a committee member and he wasn't prepared on the floor.
I'm ready to screen share if you're
Okay,
ready.
let's screen share.
And if you want to go right to the side by side, or do you want to?
Yeah, I think we'll go
Finish
to the
looking.
side by side. I'm going to have to, so I can see everything. Or maybe I don't. So I can see 3 committee members.
Can you make that a little bigger for us, Faith?
Sure.
If you do that, I am going to have to shut out committee members to see it. All right. I think,
So, yeah,
Go ahead.
so this actually starts with was what was kind of one of the last decision points, which is whatever programs, and it sounds like you're narrowing down where you would like the money to go and how. Does it go through a new entity, or does any of it go through existing departments and programs? So this is starting, just the way the bills are organized, starts within the House, the VCBA, and in S118, reconstituted VTA, basically.
Okay,
And so the big question,
can we skip that? Because to me, what you decide what you want to do, and then you set up the authority, the appropriate governing structure.
sure.
I mean, that, unless somebody objects, because,
No, I like that.
yeah,
Okay, so let's see. Then I think maybe what we would do is scroll down, Faith, if you don't mind, to page 5.
yeah, there was a lot
So
of,
I skipped over, what the duties are, but that's relevant, to what you want to see, whether it's planning or financing. But I think where you want to go now is to funding kind of the conditions
yeah,
of any financial awards. That seemed to be what you're talking about. So that there may be grants, there may be loans, but what conditions attach to any awards that go out. And so what I just want to mention at the outset, in the House, you'll see listed under 8086, they have listed a number of funding priorities. So these are not requirements. Ultimately, the money will flow through the CUDs, who will decide if they want to partner with an existing ISP and whatever service that they feel is best for their community. So they'll be the decision maker, but the priorities that, the entities that's going to be given out the funds that the House proposed are providing service to unserved and underserved locations as part of a plan that achieves universal broadband coverage in a community. So this is the kind of opposite of the line extension approach that you've already talked about. Supports 100-100 service, leverages federal or public-private partnership resources, supports low-income or disadvantaged communities, promotes geographic diversity of funding, provides consumers with affordable service options, and includes public broadband assets that can be shared by multiple service providers and that can support a variety of public purposes. So again, these are the priorities that the awarding entity would take into consideration. So, I'm just mentioning that because to the extent you want to be more prescriptive and have requirements, obviously you can do that. So some of the, in S118, there was, with respect to the speed requirements, their requirement that there be a minimum, that the provider offer a minimum of 25.3, so a little bit lower level of service is eligible for funding, but that it must be capable of being upgraded to 100 symmetrical, consistent with the state's goals. And then there's a similar proposal with respect to open access, basically, that multiple service providers can have access to the infrastructure. So I think these are all different ideas that you've talked about. I think one of the ideas that maybe is not here is this notion of specifying, I don't know whether you call it overbuilds or competition, but just being a little bit clearer about that issue, that there you may be going by service or served areas to get to the underserved or unserved, and that is or is not okay. I think you've heard that
Well,
that's
you
how
get
most
there.
networks are built out. And then the ownership issue of, is it a state asset? Should it always be a state asset? Should there be mechanisms for the state recouping the assets if there's a failure in performance? So those are, I think, most of the conditions that you've discussed.
Discussed but not answered.
Yeah, why don't we keep going and then we'll get an idea of what's out there?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Sirotkin, I
I just
think.
wanted to ask Maria, did the House ever talk about net neutrality as a requirement for people getting this money?
No, I don't recall that ever coming up in the discussions.
Trying to get
Unless I
someone
wasn't,
from, the Attorney General's office to talk to us about the legal status of
Good,
net neutrality
They're
good.
coming in next
Mhm.
Friday.
coming in next Friday.
Madam Chair. and
Yes.
I don't know if that individual or who we could talk to just to make sure that we have it straight. Sometimes we talk about net neutrality. Sometimes we talk about open access. When Ms. Hallquist was in, she was talking about different interpretations of the phrase open access. So
Right.
it'd be great if we got a little technical assistance on just what we mean by that. Thank you. For me, at least.
Yeah, I think
And just at a very high level, when you're talking about open access, neutral host, you're talking about access really to the infrastructure. So if it's fiber, multiple providers may be able to use the various strands. You may keep some of the strands available for public purposes or for competitors to have access to some of the strands. Same thing for neutral host in the wireless world, that wireless providers could use a tower, put their facilities on a tower. The net neutrality conversation has more to do with the service, the internet service that's provided by the ISP to the consumer, and not engaging in blocking or throttling, slowing down service. So I think it's a difference between how the service is delivered in net neutrality and how the infrastructure is available with respect to open access.
Okay.
If we
Thank-
told
Yes.
us, or if we knew what we wanted, then we would know which of those to pick, right?
I think we're talking about open access, aren't we?
What do we,
I think the conversations have been about open access. This is the first I've heard about potentially adding a net neutrality requirement for services delivered over. So that's certainly something you could, discuss further.
Madam Chair. Maria, Sarah Sirotkin, thank you for bringing that up. It's been on my mind and I should keep better notes. Maria, we have over the years wrestled with net neutrality, not open access, net neutrality. Is there any reason to think that giving out state grant money would, we sort of don't have a lot of rights in the world of net neutrality, but when we're buying things or paying for it, do we think we reclaim that right, or is that what the AG's office has to tell us?
We already
it's-
passed the law
it's cer-
requiring that.
Yeah, so it's certainly something the AG's office can comment on, give their opinion, but you're absolutely right. When you passed the law in 2018, you basically required any ISP that wants a government contract for internet service. So when the legislature or the administration buys internet service for its use, it's acting like any other consumer, and it can require an ISP who wants to provide that service to comply with whatever conditions it wants in its contract. So that's what the governor in his executive order and the legislature in its law required that for government contracts, an ISP has to agree to comply with net neutrality. That was challenged. That case is still pending in Vermont. The point that you're making is very similar. It's something that's often referred to as a market participant doctrine, that when the state is buying services like a consumer or spending its own money in the market through like a grant program, it has some more discretion to decide who's eligible and can condition money on, providers agreeing to comply. So they don't have to apply for grant money. They can choose not to. So it's not a requirement. Having said that, just like the prior law was challenged, if you were to put a condition here, there's a lot happening in terms of the litigation that seems to be more supportive of states being more proactive, but it's still something that, you may get some pushback or concern about, but you're absolutely right. The state's ability to spend its money and decide where it wants that money to go and who's eligible, there's a little more discretion. It's not the same as just regulating outright all services in Vermont.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question of Ms. Royal? The conversation goes back and forth, and I just want to make sure, I don't have the bill in front of me. In general, are we talking about eligibility requirements or something? I'm trying to make sure that we're not actually picking who we want, or this new entity isn't picking who they want so much as that entities that want to apply decide through their own actions whether or not they're going to be eligible for funding, which seems like semantics in one way, but seems important to me that it's not about us sort of actively choosing. It's defining a kind of service we want, and then any eligible entity can then apply. In the end,
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think you're describing what the parameters are for these public dollars that are going out, what your expectations are. And then, depending on which way you go in terms of who can actually apply, it could be any ISP willing to take on those, or it could be, something more narrow.
Okay, thank you.
But net neutrality, would that mean that we pay to put up, we give a grant to put up fiber to a CUD, and then a national carrier comes along and says, we would like to rent your fiber? And this is a big one. Could they? So what we're saying is you would not be able to rent fiber to this national carrier unless they would guarantee net neutrality? Is that?
So that's a broad, I think that's a broader requirement. So there's one, just say any carrier, any partner with the CUD, basically agreeing to provide only internet service that's net neutral, that complies with net neutrality rules. I think where you're going, it's a little bit broader. It's saying that any maybe public infrastructure, publicly financed infrastructure, if any ISP, and it's open access infrastructure, so any ISP can lease that. You're saying, well, no, if you want access to that infrastructure, you have to agree that service using that infrastructure complies with net neutrality. That's a little bit broader. I think it's a little, well, there's a lot of uncertainty about what the state can do, but I think that goes a little bit further than just saying any ISP that accepts a grant is going to agree, because then you're really reaching out a little more.
So those of us, all right, so if in order to get a grant, an ISP that's working with a CUD has to say they will agree to net neutrality. So they're not gonna do higher and lower speeds or different fees for different, all right? So they string it up. But I'm
So
not
you-
sure what we're gaining if then, a national carrier can come along and rent fiber and not be net neutral. So just, what is the committee members thinking of?
I think if we're giving out money, we should insist upon model customers. We're talking about what kind of restrictions or requirements. I mean, I think the House set it up as priorities. Senator Brock's, I think, is a little bit more mandatory on certain things. And I mean, just like, there are a lot of things we do with contracts, with public dollars that we require of the people we contract with to go above and beyond what a private company or private enterprise might do, because it's taxpayer dollars. And I think what you're asking, Madam Chair, is not uncommon, that it applies not only to the person who got the subsidy or the assistance to build the lines or whatever, but also to any subcontractors that they choose to contract with. Otherwise, you're right, it's meaningless.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Hardy.
I think though, if I'm following, I don't disagree with you, Senator Sorokin, but I think if I'm following what Maria was saying about net neutrality versus open access, the net neutrality is on the service itself,
That's right.
not the infrastructure. And so we, the state, aren't necessarily paying for the service. At least at this point, we're paying for the infrastructure. We're paying for them to lay the or hang the cable or whatever, hang the fiber. So that we could put open access requirements on and say anybody should have access and interoperability with that fiber, like Senator Bray is suggesting. But then unless we're paying for the service on top of that through subsidies or through further appropriations, and this is maybe a question for the AG, would that allow us to require net neutrality, and only if we paid for it?
Well,
So two
how
questions
is-
are mixed.
Yeah, I mean,
I think we need to, I just wanted to clarify
Yeah.
what we were talking about. So when the Attorney General is in, or his office is in here, we're clear about what we're asking.
Yeah.
Yep.
Senator, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So I think you're putting your finger on a good point, because although I see the distinction, I'm glad Senator Hardy's reminding us the distinction that Ms. Royal was making, but the service and the infrastructure are so tightly bound together that if we had restrictions on one but not the other, it could become a meaningless distinction. It'd be like building a public highway. Everyone can be on it, but the left-hand lane can only be used by one vendor's cars, and they all get to go faster because there's never a traffic jam in their lane. So I think we'd want to have the requirement percolate down all the way through the contracts.
I think,
I agree. I mean, there's definitely a distinction between open access and net neutrality. But the heart of the issue is we're giving out a ton of money to make the product affordable. And when we talk about affordability in this bill, and I assume we'll get to that assuming we want to try and do something about affordability, we're not going to say, well, here's all your money for stringing it up, but you don't have to do anything in terms of affordability, because that's the service delivery. That's not the capital part of it.
So what we're really asking is, can we say to anyone, any ISP that is going to buy fiber, you have to abide by net neutrality?
No.
No.
Well, yeah, yes.
We're trying to decide what it is we would like to have happen and then ask how to make it happen. If fiber goes down the road, can we say anybody can tap into that fiber to use it, provided that they provide the customer with 100.
No, Senator, I think you're off.
Madam Chair, I think we're merging several
Yep.
concepts.
I think
Could
some
I
of us are.
unpack them?
We're talking right now about the federal lawsuits and the state law saying that in order to get a state contract, you have to be net neutrality, which means you can't give preferential treatment to some channels, programs, providers that run over your cable. You can't charge more or less to certain customers. You have to be neutral.
So
It has nothing to do with 100 speed, Senator.
It's legal.
This is the lawsuit.
Wait, but
Can I just maybe just say a couple things?
Yeah, please.
So just to be clear, I think it was Senator Sorokin who brought up the affordability issue. So, and I think that's maybe a good example. So if you're providing a grant to a provider to build out their network, and you want to condition the receipt of that funding on they need to have a low-income plan, I think that's something that you can do. But you can see that if you're providing money for a CUD or another entity to build what is going to be public infrastructure, essentially, available to any ISP that wants to, it's a little bit broader to say any ISP that wants to do business in Vermont and use that transport needs to provide a low-income plan. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just it's a broader reach of the state's authority. And the only other thing that I'm going to say about that is the prior FCC had a very narrow approach on states' authority and tried to preempt everything, right? And that was struck down in the Mozilla case. And the opportunity or the opening was granted that states may have some regulatory authority depending on what the markets are like, where they are, what the consumer needs are, right? As a consumer protection, if there isn't choice, that there may be some authority, but that's going to be decided on a case-by-case basis. The last thing I'm going to say is in California, they have a very broad plan that basically requires, it's like the federal rules. All ISPs doing business in California must comply with net neutrality. So it's as broad as you can possibly get at the state level. And it's still early in that litigation. However, the district court judge has said, that there's not a basis for preliminary injunction, which signals that what the state in California was attempting to do may be okay, although, that's going to be likely appealed, et cetera. So I'm saying all of this to say there's still a lot of uncertainty. I don't want to say you can't do it because things have changed with the litigation, with the new FCC. There's a lot of potential more. I'm just trying to, on the spectrum of state action with respect to net neutrality, there's on the one end government contracts, then there are government grants for providing the service, and there are grants for building public infrastructure and putting requirements on the use of that. It kind of, it's all a spectrum. And so where the courts will ultimately come down, there's a little bit of a to be determined. So I don't want to discourage you from pursuing it. I just feel like I need to let you know that there's a lot that might happen through the
Yeah.
FCC, depending on who's.
Okay. I think what we
Sure.
we needed to be clear what we were talking about, so we are prepared to have a discussion with the Attorney General's office
Madam
and
Chair,
find out what they would recommend. Okay?
Madam Chair, good.
Yes.
I think this is a helpful conversation. I strongly support us including a net neutrality provision in there. And I think in the cases of the CUD, they're not going to sue us because they already agree and it's just a little backup for them. But I think it's very different from talking about open access. And I think we heard yesterday, as much as I like the theory of open access, you can't very well put all this money into a CUD model and then demand open access so that Comcast comes in and uses that infrastructure to get more customers at a cheaper rate. That's absurd. They can afford to do it as a loss leader. We heard real clear yesterday that that is not a workable model. So I don't think we should be talking about that kind of open access. I think we could find a way and should find a way to talk about a public, default ownership if there's a problem. I think there's different ways we could do this, but open access is a different thing. And I just think it sounds good and has a real problematic impact right out of the gate. So, and I think it frankly is confusing, this net neutrality discussion, which is really straightforward and important in my mind.
Well, it seems to me that we need clear definitions of what we mean by net neutrality, what we mean by open access. My interpretation of open access means that you have the ability that if you have a string of fiber, that you offer that to other providers to share, but on a fair market value rental basis. My understanding of net neutrality is related to the content that goes over that line of making the content available, again, on a price basis. But I think there are fundamental differences between those two concepts. And I think we need to just have that clearly explained to us by someone who knows it better than I do, so that we understand what we're really talking about and what its implications are.
So, Madam Chair, for our AG visit, I've put down 3 things: net neutrality, open access, and the potential to require low-cost service.
Okay. And I think we've heard a couple of times that starting out, that requiring low-cost service would not work for the CUDs because they're going to be so heavily leveraged in the beginning.
Right.
If they
And I
had
think,
to offer, yeah.
Right. So I'm not really
The
arguing
proposals-
for it. I'm just saying that it's on our list for that visit. That's all.
Yeah, I want to find,
Madam Chair, on this, may I comment on this
Yes, Senator.
subject?
yes, Senator McDonald.
We are spending a lot of time to find out what various terms mean and what is legal or not legal. We might choose to say, if we were to pay to build out fiber, and I'm just saying it's owned by a co-op or owned by a CUD, what would we like to set for the rules about those who hook up to that? And would we welcome anybody to hook up with it, provided that when they did hook up to it, they didn't hook copper up to it and send it out to provide 4.1 or 25.3, that they had to send out fiber to the customer, and they had to contribute the same amount to the maintenance of that cable, that fiber going by, that anyone else had to pay to operate that. And if they paid the same amount and for the maintenance on a cooperative pole as the next person to provide the same 100 service, that they could charge whatever they wanted to the customer. They could charge whatever they want the customer. Or we could say, you can't, if you're going to build out, you can't charge more than this to the customer. And the folks could choose to take it or leave it, if that's what we wanted to say. And then we could ask the AG whether that's legal, if that's what we wanted to do.
Well, right now, we're deciding what we want to do.
Yes.
And we're trying to get the questions for the AG. I think this is one that the House sounds like they have kicked the can down the road. I just looked at Christine Hallquist's documents from yesterday, and they don't talk about open access. So maybe we can email, there may be an email where she's put that in, but email and ask her because she did set what you mean by, and
Yeah, what
I
would
thought I
they
saw
like
a
to be able to
slide,
do?
but it's not on the
Yeah,
website. So maybe we can find that out from her. Senator Bray.
Yeah, that would be a good one to get more on, because remember, I read through the memo I wrote to all of us,
Yes.
and I read through them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when we got to open access, it was a nuanced answer.
Yes.
There was it's sort of a yes and no answer. So,
And it didn't register with me that you couldn't rent fiber to Comcast.
the
Under
other
what
thing,
circumstances?
Well, I just said, and Christine Hallquist thing, I didn't register that was a non-starter, but we will double check that.
We've agreed that that CUDs might want to partner with, oh, I hate that word. We might want to sign a contract or make available to other entities to
Yes.
build off their line to meet the goals that we put
Well,
forth.
that's what we're gonna check with her.
Yep.
Okay,
so
Senator Bray has,
the thing I don't know, we do it now, but to ask Ms. Royal about telecom analogs to this, like we have a low cost service, don't we have a low cost service provision related to basic telecom service or like universal? And maybe there's some model on somewhat similar services and infrastructure that are useful just to look at as we sort this one out.
You mean like basic service for
Yeah, don't we?
the local exchange carriers? Yep. There, and you
Right.
do,
telephone.
yep.
Right. I mean, there's that obligation to go to every home, which is kind of like what Senator Pearson was talking about. If you have to offer service to everyone, then they also have a universal, there's a low, I forget what it's called, like the universal service charge that also helps some people have low cost service, right?
It's a different issue.
Right. Right.
Telephone, Senator McDonald.
When you say provide a service, do you mean allow a technology to take place, or do you mean
No, Senator
sell a
McDonald, this
commercial
is
product?
existing telephone. Okay, we're talking about existing telephone service. As far as I know, my telephone line doesn't have a speed.
Right. Well, anyway, so all I'm trying to say is while we wrestle with this one, have we already wrestled with it in something somewhat analogous in the past and come to a shared understanding?
Senator Pearson.
I would just say on this whole paying for service, like, can people afford it? I hope we won't spend time on it in this bill. It's obviously important, but it's a distraction. It is not central to our goal, and it is a problem to look at in another day, I believe firmly. What we've been talking about with a mandate to offer a low-cost telephone service had to do in the days when it was monopoly, and it was part of that compromise, and it's totally different. And I just worry that we're going to get distracted. There's not obvious good solutions to how we get it so people can afford it. But right now, there's no it for too many people to afford.
Let me just throw in a slightly alternative view. And I understand that Senator Pearson has a point about our potentially getting bogged down in peripheral issues. But this again goes back to that issue of strategy, of what is it we're trying to achieve in the long run. And what we're trying to achieve is to get universal broadband for everybody. And if we
Cool.
don't do it in a way that's affordable, we will have failed. We have gotten a lot of wires and cables out, but if the people that we're trying to reach can't access it, then we've wasted a lot of time and money. The key, as far as the strategy is concerned, is to think through how we're going to get to that end result of ubiquitous coverage with people being able to get on it. We've got to think that on the front end, because all the numbers in terms of what the investment is to start with are hinging on that. If we don't plan how we're going to expend money toward that end result, then our planning is going to be flawed. If we plan, for example, to invest in a system in which you have to have a rate of $60 or $70 a month for basic service, for that to be profitable, that is going to be a problem, because we know that our low-income people can't afford that. That to me is why you've got to tie in affordability as one of the criteria in your overall design of what you're going to do.
It's totally
Or
disagree.
the CUDs have to.
Or the CUDs have.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because they've got to know if they're going to run them, and Christine went through this, what percentage of take up are you going to get to make this possible? Because if you string it out there and you don't get the take up you need to pay for it, and you don't have offsetting oversubscription somewhere else, you're not going to be able to pay your bond.
Or you have to figure out, or at least accept the fact that you're going to have an indefinite public subsidy of some kind that will continue after the federal funds are gone. And that's an alternative way of approaching it.
That is an alternative. Okay.
Senator,
Yeah, Senator Hardy, there you
Thank you.
are.
Senator Brock, I think you bring up a really good point, and it's hard to figure out exactly how we do that. But I will point out that in H360, in the funding priorities list, they have support low income and disadvantaged communities and provide consumers with affordable service options as two of the priorities for giving out the money. So we certainly could beef that up if we have ideas to do it, but I think that that's already part of the broader plan, and something that sort of in some ways comes after the fact, because as Senator Pearson pointed out, we have to build the infrastructure first.
Yes.
Right. But if we build the infrastructure, we're basing it on, if we build it, they will come. Which.
Yes. We may have
and-
to help them after we built it.
But I think we have also heard several pieces of testimony that when they built it out, people still signed up for their old 4-1 based on that's what they could afford and they were just doing email. I think I would have a problem forcing people to take or accept 100 service if they can't afford it and they don't want it.
Don't
I
have to
still
take it.
have relatives that don't let their kids watch TV.
But we're not talking about that, Madam Chair. We're
Yeah,
not talking about what the customers can buy. We're talking about what the system can support.
Deliver, okay.
Yes.
But I'm just, because the House had that at least 25.3, but could be raised to 100. I think that's going to have to be fiber because you can't hook fiber to cable. So, okay.
Just
Maria, let's keep moving. Senator Bray.
Well, it's just one other way we've addressed. So this time on the electric sector, there are utilities with inclining block rates. So the first 500 kilowatts is at a particularly low rate. So those who are not heavy users that's their way of addressing it. And then as you use more, you pay more. So there's a lot of ways to get to the end through rate design. I don't know that we should try to figure that one out. But it may be a design criterion for others to figure out.
In Massachusetts, the more you paid, the more you used, the less you paid. I had an electric dryer and electric stove, and I was paying less than my monthly bill with two kids in diapers that I was washing and drying than my grandmother was living across the street. And she had all gas utility. So
25-cent oil.
yeah, that's right. All right. We are going to keep going through, okay? Because I'm trying to see what we agree with. So we've gotten through all right. I think we're into programs, Maria, right? We had the
Yep.
standards and then we
So-
have the programs. All right.
Right.
We have the priorities
just-
and then we have the programs.
Yep. And you'll notice though, right before pre-construction on both S180, 118 and H336, the last bullets there include public broadband assets that can be shared by multiple service providers and that can support a variety of public purposes. That is their open access issue. That's what that's getting at. And that, again, it's not a requirement, but it's something that's to be prioritized. Ultimately, it's the CUDs who decide, what is the best solution.
Okay.
But I just wanted you to be aware that the language is there. How prescriptive you want to be is something I understand you're still mulling over. So moving on to the actual awards of financial support, pre-construction grants. I think we've been over this. I think you're familiar already with what it is. The only thing I'll just mention is that the House appropriated $30 million for this particular program and authorized the Department of Public Service to allocate up to $9 million of that $30 million on or before September 30th. So they could start getting this money out
Out the door.
immediately before the new authority is organized and operational.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
okay. Does anybody have a problem with pre-construction grants? Can we agree we're going to put up some form of funding for those? Okay.
In areas that are underserved or unserved.
Yeah, Senator, that's already dealt with. That's a given. Okay? And you may have to do some pre-construction grants to figure out how to get through some built-out areas to get to unbuilt-out ones. All right, next.
Next is a new grant program for construction. I should say grant and subordinated debt program for the actual construction of networks. And they appropriated $120 million towards this program, ARPA funds, obviously. So these are grants and loans for CUDs to support their projects consistent with the priorities that we've already reviewed. And this could be a means of supplementing financing through other entities, in particular VITA's Broadband Expansion Loan Program, which we created a couple years ago. Yes, so that's
Okay.
an overview of that program.
All right. So anybody
Uh,
disagree with giving out construction loans? And we probably should say something in here about, the loans would be for the full project, even though they could be dispersed as, there could be a phased disbursement. Does that work for folks?
When phase disbursement, you mean like based on the value of the work completed, like a
Yeah,
payment
like,
schedule?
like phase one is we're going to do, I'm thinking of CV Fiber, and they've got plans to do a bunch of work with Washington Electric Co-op. There's going to be so
Right.
much they're going to say they're going to do the first year and so much the second year. And they need to have they need to know we've approved of the full project and that we will reserve the funds provided, they meet criteria along the way. We're not, and we haven't been actually with the CARES money or whatever we're calling it. The money didn't go out except for some, expenses to start up. The money did not go out until the project was done. So
Right.
I don't know that we can do that on something this large, because those were 3-month, not 3-year projects. But I think we've heard from the CUDs that they need to know that not just phase one, but that the project is approved.
Right.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Hardy.
it seems to me that the CUDs are all at sort of different places, and that some would be ready for construction grants this year and some are still in pre-construction mode. And so having all these options out there is probably provides the most flexibility and ability for each of them to move forward at the phase that they are in.
Yeah, I think that's.
Do we want to be so prescriptive as to have VITA be the only option as a lender?
I don't know that the language actually
I'm
says
looking
it's
at what you
only
have
VITA
on the side of loan
on
service
the
by
summary.
VITA.
Yes, let me, I
Banks,
didn't think
banks can
it was
lend
that
money.
prescriptive.
Bond market can lend money. Wall Street lends money for this.
Grant and lending decisions, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just the way I summarized it. I don't think it was, but let me, unfortunately, I don't have internet access. I can't pull it up right now, but your point's well taken. I think it was, it could be used to supplement any financing that they had access to, including VITA, but let me double check that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to at least allow the possibility of funding arrangements other than loans and grants, including the potential of taking equity positions under certain circumstances.
Yeah, we can probably find a
Okay.
broader way. I mean, I think right now we're being told we can't use this for loans.
For revolving loans.
Yeah, that can change, or that may be different when the infrastructure grants come in, and we may need to tweak things.
Yeah, I mean, one of the
Um,
questions is, could you do loans within the time window of having to make grants? So that you provide, and this is just hypothetical, you provide funding for them to do pre-construction or acquire this, that, and the other. And if the project fails, you can call your loan and get your money back if you do it within 4 years. I mean, I don't know if that's a possibility or not, but we should at least be thinking about that one, so that when we see the rules, we've thought about other options. Problem is, when you do grants, how do you get it back? Well, you can't get it back, for one thing, because if it's a loan and the money's paid back, it's got to go back to the federal government.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah. Right now, Vita would probably be the place they'd go, but I don't know that we want to preempt that, and prescribe that.
Well, for example, you take EC Fiber, which is now a more advanced, in a more advanced state than these entry-level CUDs. Would EC Fiber go to Vita, or would they go out to public markets?
Yeah.
At this stage.
And that also leaves out crowdfunding. That is essentially what EC Fiber did.
Yep.
To start out. So I think as long as it's legal and prudent, we probably should let them figure it out. S-175 has the broadband core in here. And this isn't, it has some funding. EC Fiber has given it some funding, and they're working through the CAP agencies, but really working to help people figure out what grants they might be eligible for, or subsidies, figure out why they might even want to consider, help find funding for the equipment, including, a computer. It's an organization. This might not be the final form. There is one, Holly Grosvenor's got a smaller version of this, but is this something we want to talk about? Do we want to put that in the bill?
Have we finished on grants and versus loans?
You've been through what the House has in there. We have finished that. That is the House's two programs. One is pre-construction grants, and one is construction grants. There is the thing that we don't have in here is, let's see, pre-construction grants.
Pole harvesting,
Pre-construction
planning,
costs such as including
engineering, study grants.
planning, make ready work.
Yep.
I think what we heard from the CUDs, and I found it interesting because I had taken notes when the CUDs were in here and what they needed, and they were all, and then I went back to when they first came in, and I had a lot, everybody seemed, we've got three essentially maturing. EC Fiber is the grandparent here. Then
Yes.
we've got Central Vermont and Northeast, which are probably moving into the early adulthood stage. And then we've got from going through my notes from the first interview, a lot of just starting out or
So what's the
early
question we're trying to
Well,
answer
I
here?
think the question is, these pre-construction grants in the list are really, they're talking about pole harvesting and engineering. I think what we heard was legal help, help finding and paying for a bookkeeper. Help
There's several,
finding and putting,
Yes.
finding a
There's
desk.
several-
I mean, they were very
yes, Madam Chair,
preliminary.
we've listed the several things that have to be done before they put shovels in the ground. And once that's done and we set money aside and we agree to that, there's the matter of, do they get loans to begin construction? Or do they get loans or grants to begin construction?
Right now, the rule of thumb from Joint Fiscal Office is that loans are not acceptable.
So how do we resolve that in our proposal in our bill?
So in H 360, it has pre-construction grants and it has construction grants, and they
Right.
are grants paid for by ARPA funds. They also have loans through VITA. And to answer Senator Brock's question, I skimmed through, and Maria can confirm this, but I don't think there's anything that would prohibit them from getting a loan from a private lender or another source. It's
There's
just
a
that
lot
the VITA loans
prohibits
have
them, yeah.
specific requirements that they have to meet because they're public loans. And a lender or private lender may have different requirements.
They are high-risk loans.
Yes.
They're high risk
That's-
startup loans, and they
all
specifically
true.
say that it's essentially loans for start. Mark, can you just hold on for a second? And you made me lose my train of thought. I just want to remind everybody, like we did before with the line extension, is we did provide some pre-construction funding, I think 1.6 million in H 315, that was to cover some of those things that you were listing, Madam Chair, like the legal and the bookkeeping
Grants?
and all those things. So what it
Yes,
sounds
those are
like,
grants.
and
Grants.
those are grants with leftover CRF funding. So what it sounds like is that many of the CUDs will sort of be beyond that. And as we've heard in testimony recently, a lot of them have already started doing they've already gotten very far along with the pole harvesting data. I mean, you could see what Christine Hallquist was showing us yesterday. They have almost all of that already mapped out for that CUD, for the 2 CUDs she's working with. So I think that there's
Yes.
a lot further along.
That wasn't
than
my
we think.
question. My question was that those things are taking place and we understand how they're taking place. When it's time to put the shovel in the ground, will this be with grant money?
Yes, I answered that question, Mark. Senator McDonald, construction grants is
Okay,
part of the program.
and
Okay,
and Madam Chair, the
Yes,
construction grants are different than construction loans,
yes.
because when you get a loan, you have to prove that you've got things all set to go. How do we intend to put in the same level of scrutiny before those grants are permitted to start construction? And I thought Senator Brock had some answers to that. Or are we just going to skip over that
No, we aren't.
question?
I think what we've done in very short order is when we created the CUDs, we made them a municipality and we said, you can get revenue bonds. You can go out to the bond market. But there is this,
Not without assets.
okay, space of time. So we set up the VITA loans and then we set up the backstop funding for the ones that fail. So you have to go into VITA. Now we've got this big slug of federal money. And that money is going to cover the cost in large part that the VITA loans would have. But we have not answered.
But
There
not taking
is
out
all right,
loans.
right, let me finish.
Okay.
There is a requirement for business plans to be approved in the CUD statute, and they are approved. They,
By who?
okay. Well, that's, I think, something we can look at. I think we can say we have not set up a formal process that at least any of us know at this moment to protect the public money, that it is being invested in a project that is feasible. I think that may be covered under the approved business plan, but we need to check that. Senator Pearson.
Thank you. We're not allowed to make loans, so like it or not, that's been answered. And I just
For
want to
now.
point out that the House puts the engineering expertise and the finance expertise, bakes it into the authority structure, which is smart. They are trying to centralize those resources. So I've heard those questions circulate. How are we going to do that? I think the better question is, do we like the way the House has done that? And do we want to make a
I don't
change?
know what the House has done.
Well, read the
What?
bill, Senator.
Yeah.
We've had it for
Who-
3 weeks.
Who makes the decision? That
The
they are
board.
The
kosher?
authority has the expertise that is loaned liberally to the CUDs. They are support staff for the CUDs. It's baked right in there. And you know, these are the right questions, but when the answer is on the paper in front of us, then we ought to at least notice that. I think.
There is their version. Maria, is there any money in this
We agree with
bill to pay for this board?
Yes, the operational cost of the board.
Operate,
Comes from
yeah, I mean, to get the
Yeah.
level of skill in one person, I'm assuming we are going, A, it'll be challenging, and B, you frequently get what you pay for. So it will, to get what we need may not be cheap. So
Right.
I think we just need to make sure that whatever system we come up with for oversight is adequately funded.
Right. So in terms of the operational costs of the authority, that comes from the universal service charge, that 0.4%. So it's about $900,000 a year. Any leftover amount goes towards their other programs. In terms of being very specific about salaries, there's nothing in the House bill. Senator Brock did propose that the chief executive officer, who's the chair of his board, gets compensated like a superior judge. Anyways, I just wanted to
That's a standard.
flag
Okay.
that.
So we can look at this, but right now, that economic and oversight is vested in some kind of a centralized authority. Because I think we
Yeah.
all know that, as Mrs. McNulty said, that when you're giving away a whole lot of free money, and I know most of us have found it in their emails, when the word is out, there's lots of free money, the tendency for a feeding frenzy exists, and somebody has to sit down and weed it through and figure out what's ready, what's the best investment at this time in those public funds. Is this a viable project? Have they done their homework? Have they thought it all through? And that we still need to deal with. I'm trying to get us to decide what we want to do, and then we will decide what structure is going to help us get there. They're not putting in money for formation or initial plan, that money is going into the board. The other problem we have is 900,000 isn't there there is a $1 million deficit at E911, which I don't, and it was a systemic ongoing deficit. It wasn't a 1-year one. And somewhere we are going to have to find a way to either fund it or tell them to swallow it. But the traditional funding source for 911 has been the universal service charge. And there was kind of a floating top, limited, I think, to 2%. And it floated according to the needs of the funded entities. We raised it to 2%, I think 4 years ago, which was the cap. We said, no, it's going to be 2%. And the difference is that money is dedicated to connectivity. So the float isn't there that used to be to cover the 911 deficit. But so we may need to find another way to either fund E911 or to fund our governance structure. We could fund it out of grants. Again, if it's a 3-year job, maybe Mike Smith's looking for another one, but it gets harder to find skilled labor for 3 years, just in general. But that is an issue we have to work with. And Maria, did the House have they done anything on the deficit in E911? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know if House Appropriations, I'm sure they've talked about it. I don't know if they have a proposal, but I'll find out.
So that gets us back to the Broadband Corporation. If not, do we want to set up something? This is kind of building off Holly Grosvenor's group that's working with the CAPS to help lower income people and older people. I think they had Office on the Aging in there, but help people just think through how you can get and what's available to help you get broadband service. Is that
Counseling,
something?
house visits and things like that?
Pardon?
Counseling, house visits, going to folks' homes to show them what they can.
Yes, they
do.
would.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
that was part of what.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we're agreed that that's what we wish to do.
It's not a subsidy.
That's a different
Senator
matter.
Hardin.
That's a different matter.
Yeah.
Subsidy is. separate.
I don't know that we're agreed because I think I'm a little mixed on it. On one hand, I think it's a good idea. On the other hand, I'm not really sure. I think it might be a tangent to all of this, and that I think that there are services right now that provides assistance for people for all sorts of access to programs, to, subsidies, to grants across the board. And this could just be one of the things that they do. And baking it into this, I think, will be a distraction from the goal of trying to provide universal coverage. And so I'm a little less psyched about having this as part of this program right now. Maybe putting some language somewhere else. I mean, Anne, I'm thinking like our morning committee, there's all these social service programs that this could be just yet another one of those.
But yeah, I think
We-
that
so
was
we-
it. It was providing the instruction to, Holly's was providing it like to state social workers,
Right.
to CAP workers, to just work, and they're there.
So-
Right. But I mean,
so,
just as an
Madam Chair,
example, so
Let her finish.
the elderly services, the adult day programs, did this kind of work for senior citizens this year. They
Yes.
provided iPads just like they did to 7th graders. They explained to them how to use them, how to connect to the internet. And they did that through these existing programs and existing staffing and I'm not saying we shouldn't support those, but I'm just not sure this is where we would want to put it.
So,
Want to do it.
Senator Hardy, so your recommendation is that we don't adopt this right now and that we pursue the things that you've wisely suggested, and that we agree that's what we're going on this issue, and then we can go to the next thing? Because it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm saying that we
You're
don't.
agreeing,
do
I'm
this right
moving
now.
on.
Okay.
I think
we're
I
agreeing
think
on
it's a
moving on.
distraction
Thank
from
you.
the
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
universal
Thank you for
coverage
moving us on.
issue.
All right. We've got an annual report. Anybody have a problem with an annual report? Okay, this is all setting up, I think.
Yep, the organizational stuff. The only thing that maybe
Yeah.
you've skipped over that you'll want to talk about, assuming you are setting up an entity, how long should it exist? Is there a sunset? And if so, what is it? And maybe I'm jumping the gun by assuming that you are
No.
setting up a new entity.
Because we've heard I assume that the House set this entity up to go away when the money went away.
2020.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, they're both set up for very limited terms. We heard, I think from Holly and Chris Campbell, I think they were the ones that said, once you put out rural electricity, it didn't end the need to have some overseeing authority.
Right.
But that gets into state funding and ongoing commitment. So
We're not syncing this up with the arrival and departure of cicadas. I thought we were on a 17-year cycle on this when we talked about it.
I don't know, how many are we going to get here?
I don't know. But anyway, for serious things, I agree. It's like there may be most of the money going out in the next, whatever it is, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. But I can't imagine that the need to help doesn't last for a long time.
Or unless we kick it, like I suppose Public Utility Commission is.
Maybe it boils down 10 years from now, there's just one person at DPS who manages this network or something, but.
Well, yeah. They will be having oversight, but hopefully not promotion. All right. Okay, Maria, where are we now?
Okay.
Annual report. Senator Pearson draws the line. No annual report.
No annual report. All right, that's out.
Or quarterly report.
No reports.
Okay.
Just give them the money and tell them to go away. All
Okay.
right.
So do you want to get into the weeds on the organization? Do you want to go back to are you in agreement that you're setting up a new entity? Are you in that?
Well, I think
phase,
that's
or-
where we need to go now, is back to the beginning
Okay.
and talk
Okay.
about, we've got resuscitated VTA and we've got a new VCBA. And then we've got a whole blank space for us to write in. So we agreed
Right.
that there needs to be some small group, independent perhaps, but some small group or person, individual person, that is responsible for managing this whole thing. Or are we gonna do it ourselves?
I nominate Senator Hardy. She's very organized.
She's very organized and she can run at least 4 screens at a time.
Okay, wait, what did you just nominate me for? I'm sorry,
It'd be the czarina of telecom.
Oh, yeah, I'm so qualified for that.
We're going to issue a couple of screwdrivers as well.
Okay, and I can help everybody get the iPads and hook them up. I can be the core, just me. Do I get a fancy car?
Maybe they'll let you ride in the Batmobile while it's harvesting bulbs.
I so want a Batmobile. That would be awesome.
Yeah, you'll multitask. Wherever you go, you'll be collecting data on behalf of the state.
Ah,
I mean, when you think about how we figured out where the cell service was, that's not that far off.
Right.
it's true.
Drove
Drove
around.
around with a couple of cell phones, but the rest of the country is envious. Okay, so we need something, and we have, is it a 7-person and a 9-person board suggested, or is it 5 and 7?
7. So if you look on page 2, the House proposed 7 members on the board of directors. S118 has 9 members.
And the author of S118 is suggesting that both of those are too big. I mean, and quite frankly, I think they are. To me, the key is having some both support and also oversight from a board level, and technical knowledge and competence in key areas is what's important in the board. One of the things, that I've always been concerned about is we create all these boards to oversee things, and basically the boards spend their time having a meeting to decide on the agenda for the next meeting. And it always takes forever to get anything done. And this is and one of the reasons that I think we need a czar is we don't need this, have to review something by the board who's going to meet next month in order to make a decision to do something. We need to do things.
I think lean and mean basically 3 to 5 people, each with some different skills.
And not legislators, I would say.
Yeah, no,
I put that in there as an either or in my bill. And the more I think about it, the less I think legislators ought to be on it.
no, this is not a policy setting board.
Right. Correct.
And that's what boards are. It's not a board. It's a technical assistance, or
What
it's
about
much more hands-on. It's your task force.
what about
is what it-
the board that's in the H360, except for getting rid of the 2 members from VCUDA? And I say that because they are getting most of the money, and this board, one of the things the board has to do is approve grants. So it is a little, isn't it a little weird? Or maybe, what do you think about them approving money for themselves? So it would just be a governor's appointee, a House appointee that's not a legislator, the Senate appointee that's not a legislator, the commissioner, and
Yeah, but that's a policy setting board.
CD.
That's a board where you've got a bunch of government people.
Not necessarily, because the committee on committees, the speaker and the governor could all appoint whoever they want,
Yeah.
whoever they think is the most qualified.
But is that what do we want this board to do?
Well, we think that at least I think that there are going to be decision points that we're not going to be able to make because it gets us too far down in the weeds.
Yeah.
And some of those decisions may in fact touch upon policy. And I'm looking at a competent board that can take the basic guidance that we provide, both in terms of the statewide policies and so on, and then determine how best to execute them. And I think we have to give them a leash to be able to do that, as opposed to our trying to micromanage this thing.
I completely agree
Yeah.
with Senator Brock.
I'm thinking more of, especially in the short run, and this is all a short run, setting up an independent group, maybe within DPS, because then they get a room a desk, and some, probably some secretarial, or at least a, you know, a duplicating machine, but, and get a few people. I mean, what skills do we need? We aren't, we're the policy making group, for better or worse. But we need skills to look at these business plans and say, yeah, that works. Or have you ever thought if you went here, you'd get a better deal? Or do you really, you know, but we need somebody that's going to look at the business plans. We
Or you
need some,
somebody with financial expertise. The
Yeah.
financial expertise goes beyond simply looking at the business plans, of looking at, you know, the potential of different kinds of financing and financing structures, to look at subordinated debt, the equity market, and so on, as to what kind of financing works best, and to be able to think that through and provide the reaction when the CUDs or other entities come and look for support as to whether or not it makes financial sense.
Well, the bill has qualifications for the board members listed in there, and finance is one of them. They also have to understand, you know, communications technology, law and policy, broadband deployment in rural high-cost areas, electric utility law and policy, and not be an owner, employee, member of an ISP.
and they're going to volunteer for this.
Yeah, I mean, those are really high-end skills that we're needing. And
I'm thinking
That's what
of,
it's called ask.
And who do they
Yes.
work for?
they're an independent board. I'm thinking that we have employees that, I mean, what we really need is, we need finance, we need engineering. We've said we want these to be, you know, interconnected, interconnectable systems.
Yeah,
We've
but-
said, you know, Ms. McNulty said that there were different engineerings that had to be done, you know, when you're going up a mountain road that looks like a corkscrew compared to the, you know, the plains. So we need some engineering skill with some experience.
Who are they responsible?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to. We haven't made that decision. We probably need somebody legal reference, you know, just if you're, I can see some unnamed, you know, ISP coming in, large national or group, and coming into a group of local volunteers and saying, look, you know, here's the contract. If you sign up with me, I can do this and this and this. They need somebody to look at the contract and say, do you realize that they're going to own all your poles and wires, or they're going, you know, you need some legal review for people.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what, they're all, you know, I got a whole bunch of things on all the business plans and stuff, but I don't know who's doing that. They're hiring agencies. So Senator
Great.
Brock.
I think we need to separate what the board does as to what hired staff does. And with respect to hired staff, I don't think we should be even thinking about creating a mammoth agency with all of these hands to do this, that, and the other. I think that may be a non-starter. I think certainly, as far as the governor is concerned, to create a massive new bureaucracy. I think that there are skills, though, that are going to be needed. Many of those, I think, can be contracted out in terms of hiring, for example, the legal staff to review contracts and so on. I think there are other kinds of things like engineering that may be hired out under different circumstances, again, contractually. I think you look at a board, though, is more of an overseeing to take that the role that boards in corporations typically play. You know, you have somebody on a corporate board, they aren't reading every contract and reviewing it, but they are asking the right questions, ensuring that you do have in place the kinds of expertise necessary to deal with the subjects that you have to deal with. That's what the hired hands do. I think you need that czar to kind of lead and provide the set of direction to go along. And I think you could do that with a 3 to 5 person board, including the chief executive. And then the rest of that, they're hired hands with particular expertise that are brought in when you need them. You aren't going to need them all the time for everything. There will be, of course, you know, right at the beginning, there'll probably be a heavy reliance on legal and engineering, for example, that may serve several CUDs and several needs.
So what will the board do? I mean, this is a 3 to 5 year project.
At least.
We've set the policy parameters that we want. I'm having a hard time figuring out what a board generally sets policy, but policy, you know, I'm a VSAC. We're doing, you know, a strategic plan. The strategic plan is for a time frame longer than this money is going to exist. So that's, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do this. Senator Bray.
So having served on the VTA board, I'd say the function was in part, you know, the legislature's part-time goes home, but the work goes on day after day, all year round. And so the board meetings served as a way of basically having the legislature plus the policy voices on policy and decision-making represented on an ongoing basis as the staff kept on, you know, they were always encountering different options. How are we going to get up into the NEK? Well, there's this way and there's that way. Where's the grant money? And there was a lot of nuts and bolts work, and then there was decision-making around where to put the money. So I'm just thinking of, I appreciate the whole idea of light management, but I do think continuity is a big one, given that it's complicated. We're diving in now, but we probably have trouble taking a quiz on this on September 20th or something. So having someone who stays on the job sort of on behalf of the legislature, I think is helpful. And that they're also not part of writing the contracts or doing the engineering. It's really ongoing policy oversight. That was my experience. There was plenty to do. We never said, oh, why do we even have this board? There's nothing for us to do. There was a lot going on.
What was the criticism of the board when you were on it, and why was it scrapped?
So different. I'm not being diplomatic. It's I would say the biggest challenge was the direction of the board and the guardrails for VTA were not particularly well defined, and the funding was not particularly secure. So I feel like part of our challenge was that we worked a little bit in fits and starts on pieces of a puzzle, but we didn't have, I would say, I don't remember having a sense of, we have this overarching vision that we're talking about now, like Senator Brock bringing us back to strategy, and that we had the capacity to implement that strategy. It was a much smaller and less ambitious effort than, you know, us now committing to high-speed fiber to every home and business in the state of Vermont.
Senator Hardy.
Madam Chair, is it okay?
Chair doesn't
I
see.
said Senator Hardy.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I thought you were shutting off your,
I don't know. I think that a 5-person board is a good size. I think having one that's too over unwieldy is problematic. I think the board is going to have to be a hands-on board at the beginning, in particular, as this gets set up, and is going to need to have a lot of expertise. And I think I agree with Senator Brock, though, that the staff who is hired to be the executive director or whatever the position is called is really important. And I think we also have to remember that there already is, and it will continue to be even better expertise out in the field in the CUDs. I mean, they're all at different phases, but a lot of the people who come in to testify from the CUDs clearly have really strong knowledge. I mean, Christine Hallquist is the perfect example. And, her presentation yesterday was incredibly helpful. And so there are people like that with that kind of level of expertise that are going to be involved at one level or another. But
so will the IEPs, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that we have to have a good, solid board. And I think that's going to be hard, but anyway, I think we also have to resource it sufficiently to make it successful, but not excessive, that we're building a huge bureaucracy.
This does executive director hired is, it's all right, as, not by. May retain or employ technical experts. Okay, so do we want to call this the VCBA to start with? And maybe cut down the board size to 5. And then we would have made a decision today, folks. Okay, see, I got Senator Bray on my side. Okay, Senator Brock says no.
I say no, I say yes to the size of 5. I believe
Okay.
the smaller board makes sense. I don't like the community broadband because, again, it's just too narrow. And I'm a strong proponent of breadth. And you can get to the breadth if you're concerned about doing it all at once. I can picture setting milestones in order to expand. But to me, telecommunications is telecommunications. It isn't just broadband. And when you add the word community to it, it means small community, and it means 19% of what we're serving, as opposed to the totality of Vermont. And that's where I think the outlook needs to be. Yes, the emphasis in the short term is dealing with the CUD issue of expanding broadband to the hinterlands. But when we're talking about 19% of the total places where internet is served, I think this function should have a broader view than that.
Of course. But so how you?
That's why I moved to Vermont telecommunications, because we're talking to me about telecommunications. We're not talking about CUDs and broadband in the hinterland only. We're talking about broadband, I believe, statewide, and I believe that it should deal with telecommunications, a larger issue, so that you don't take an issue like that has considerable overlap as far as mobile communications is concerned with broadband. And I think, as we've seen the evolution of technology over the past 15 years, more and more of this stuff is coming together, not coming apart, even though the technologies theoretically are different. If you have a person who has a cell phone, for example, and they live in the hinterland, their cell phone may not be good today, even when it comes to driving down the road to get to their home. But when they're at their home, that cell phone is live if the broadband communication is properly set up. So to me, it all converges. And it's this convergence of technology that we ought to be thinking about in terms of future-proofing this stuff, not doing this in a separate and divided way.
I think that
Yes, and what's going to go on at this board is a tension between the private folks who would like to do more and have more deference sent their way, and the CUDs would like to do more and have deference sent their way. And Brock's right, all broadband matters. There's, so.
That
how
sounds
do
like
you
a t-shirt slogan.
Pardon?
That sounds like a t-shirt slogan. All broadband matters.
And we want, and the other t-shirt would be, they have to be happy campers too, but
We are
how
getting
do-
committee t-shirts. Pearson's making them, so we can
Okay.
put that on the back.
But it's easy for the board's appointees to, I mean, how do you get it to stick with the mission and not be picked by the two sides that run? And I don't know the
Okay.
answer to that.
I'm not, all right, I'm
That's the
not, I
question, yeah.
think that there is an argument to be made that we've got a lot of money now, but this issue will continue. I walk out my front door and my phone seamlessly switches from broadband on my Wi-Fi in the house to broadband on my cell service in my driveway. And occasionally, if I'm downloading a book in the process, it tells me I have to try again. But if I drive down Route 12 5 miles, I don't have any service.
Better download that book.
Then I could, yeah, if it downloads, I can listen to it while I don't have service. But there is, and we could think about, there is an argument that the telecommunications needs and issues will continue after this first, and who knows how long the infrastructure money, if it comes, will be worth and what it will cover. There's a good chance once the kids go back to school and people go back to the office that we'll start feeling more pressure about, I can't get the same cell phone service at home. I have to have two phones, one for the office and one for home, because I don't have the same provider. That could switch as the pandemic and the needs switch. So the first, if we're agreed, we want to set up a commission, if not a board, a group that will have power and authority. And I'm not sure we are ready to cede them the power to set policy, since we are somewhat touchy about our authority to set policy. They are to carry out the policies which the legislature establishes. Now, remember, the problem that happened with the VTA was it got set up that way, and then the governor comes in and says, look, I'm being held, accountable in the public for not, what were we going to be? The connected state or the
Well, yeah, all those
something,
issues.
it was a slogan. And so I need to be in charge because I'm being held publicly responsible. So where are we?
Well, and I have to be honest about that governor being responsible. It was true, but it was also in part because the governor campaigned on delivering
Yes.
the service. So,
We all campaigned on it.
and that seems to be kind of a universal promise from candidates.
But there also needs to be accountability. And the issue of having a governor accountable, I mean, that's why we created a Secretary of Education, because again, that whole argument, nobody is accountable. So who do you fire if this blows up? Well, if the governor's responsible, if that board chair or whatever we call him reports to the governor is responsible. So we have somebody who's an elective office that we can hold accountable, as opposed to a faceless Democrat or a faceless Republican or a faceless progressive who is the chair of the umpty-ump board. How do you help somebody like that accountable?
or
You can't.
150 of us.
Are you,
Well-
would you volunteer to chair this, Randy?
No,
He likes the big bucks in the legislature. so-
I
Madam
would-
Chair, I have a silly suggestion, but I would ask, I'd pick 10 of our witnesses to each nominate 5 people that they think, 10 of the witnesses that have impressed us to each nominate 5 people that they think would serve well on such a board, and just see which names come up on the top from
Well,
all 10.
I think we could all pick folks that have experience and skills that we've seen come before us. Unfortunately, most of them, if not all, are already working
Yep.
for a potentially regulated entity.
So I made a silly
and-
suggestion and I withdraw it, but I was just-
Yeah, but I mean,
challenge.
there is expertise out there, but that expertise, I think, is being used where we want it to be used at the local level. And, the House has pretty much said, we're not going to worry about the for-profit providers, the investor owned, because they're going to take care of themselves. We are investing our focus in the CUDs because they're being set up to do what we basically want done, which is to get service out to that large segment of Vermont that is not profitable for a larger entity, okay?
Yep.
And the question we have is, how do we give them the guidance, the support, and the guidance and support they need so that public funds get dealt with used in the most efficient manner, and we avoid, as far as possible, anything going seriously wrong, which could blow the whole thing up for another 10 years.
Well said.
I mean, and that's kind of, I'm not sure it's a policy setting board. I still think what we're asking is more of a task force to guide and to steer this huge thing we're creating. I just don't see the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development and the Commissioner of Public Service. I mean, I don't know. And that
I
might
would
just,
I would think that we may not have a policy-making body in this board, but I think we would certainly have a policy reviewing and recommending body. Because I think that their role of being having expertise, and B, being closer to seeing what's happening on a day-by-day basis should well position them to recommend to the legislature changes in policy that may make sense based on the experience that they're having. So that may be the kind of happy medium. And by the way, before I forget it, I was thinking about it earlier about policy. One of the things that we should do in this legislation, or at least in our preparedness legislation, we should go back and look at the statewide goals contained in 30 VSA 202, C, D, E, and so on, and make sure that we're comfortable that those are the right goals. I think they are, but I think we ought to take the time to review them and make sure that we're not hinging everything we do on policies we don't agree with or that are obsolete or that need some tweaking at this point. So I think that should be part of the process that we're doing here.
okay.
Can we get copies of those for next time we meet, Madam Chair?
I'm sure Maria can find us a copy.
Sure.
Okay, and then we can walk through those because it is a good idea. We forget there are other sections of law other than the ones we're writing. Okay,
Can we go home now, Madam Chair?
I am thinking, I have been on Zoom since before 9 o'clock in the morning for the last 4 days. And I've worked through lunch every day, but today I only worked halfway through. I am ready to call it quits.
That's why we want to nominate you to run this thing, because you know when it's time to go home, Senator Brown.
Yeah, I think we've gone as far as we can. And I think on Tuesday, we're going to take up PPP loans. And this is our day. I haven't got as many members of the business community in as I'd hoped. I hope that the chamber is going to bring us some more. But we're going to sit and listen in a little more detail. I know joint fiscal is working up as a counterbalance to this argument. The argument we're going to hear is also how much money has gone out to businesses in the tens, if not hundreds of millions. But then are they the same businesses? So we're going to take a look, but we do need to decide if we're going to make any changes to that. Right now, PPP is taxable when it's converted from a loan to a grant. And I don't know that was really the concern. The concern was, but then you could also deduct the expenses you paid for with that.
This is for
Tax-free
2021,
money.
2021. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this year, it's all fine. My good friend, former Mayor Lozon, will be in. He's also a CPA. But anybody else that would like to come in, we'll hear from them. Senator Bray.
I'm just thinking back to a very recent, interesting conversation we had with the housing folks about building broadband into housing. And I don't know what bin or hook or whatever thing we call it. Maybe it's not even this bill. Maybe it's an economic development / housing bill, but I didn't want to lose track of that. It was a late arrival, but a really interesting proposition. It sounded like it could be very cost effective to get to a whole group of people.
And that they wanted to be eligible for grants.
Right.
So
I'm just sort of flagging it so we don't lose it.
yeah.
I agree,
So,
Chris. Thank you for bringing that up. And also libraries.
yes, I thought we'd done most libraries, but
I think it's an upgrade to the system. because
Maybe,
it's already
yeah.
9 years old or something like that, but I can ask the state librarian about it if you want.
okay. I mean, I know that trunk line in the kingdom was supposed to get schools and libraries lined up 10 years ago, so or more. Okay, so have a good weekend. It stopped snowing in Montpelier.
Yeah, same here. So, Madam Chair, are you on the road like Charles Corral?